Comedian Jerry Seinfeld would often cite statistics in his stand-up routine that show that the number one reported fear of people is public speaking, and that number two fear is death. Then he would ask his audience, does that seem right to you? That means to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than delivering the eulogy. I think the trick in life is to be appropriately afraid of the right thing. Over in Mark 4, Jesus was sleeping in a boat with some of his disciples when a big storm came up. I don't fault the Lord here. I think stormy weather is good sleeping weather. But the disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. And then he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." I'm sure the disciples probably did all they could as seasoned men of the sea to keep the boat upright on course. They're bailing water, as it says in verse 37, that the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped, probably yelling at each other, "Bail faster, put down that sail, steady on that rudder," all to no avail. Have you ever noticed that when our lives get in trouble, we first blame others? When that doesn't fix the situation, we turn and blame God. And they do this in a roundabout way. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Almost as if to say, "You're asleep in our greatest hour of need. If we die, this is on you. You don't even care about us." See, when the storm is big and God seems small, you are afraid of the wrong thing. So Jesus got up from the cushion and rebuked the winds and the waves and said, "Quiet, be still," and there was a great calm. Notice this story isn't like any of those old miracle healing legends where the leaders call on a higher power. They would have said, "In the name of Apollos," or "In the name of Zeus," or "Poseidon, I say be still." Jesus doesn't call on a higher authority because there is no higher authority than Jesus. He just says, "Be still" to a storm, and it has to obey. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Marveled is a whitewashed word for our English language. It doesn't really capture the color of the original, which, when properly translated, means freaked out of their ever-loving minds. In this verse, the original Greek language uses the word fear twice. It says, "They feared with great fear." They're not amazed with great joy. They're scared spitless. For a split second, the disciples may have felt relief that Jesus was with them in the boat. But now they're more afraid of Jesus than they had been of the storm. During the storm, they knew that he could save them from mortal danger, and he did. But now they feel a sense that he is the greater threat. They've taken one fear and replaced it with a greater fear. And they are absolutely right to be afraid of Jesus. For Jesus is a threat to our status quo lives. He's a threat to a person who values religion over relationship. He's a threat to sin and selfishness. He's a threat to a theology that puts God in a box. He's a threat to Satan and the powers of the sorry, dark world. And he's a threat to anything that you and I fear. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of the right thing? There are many storms that we might be afraid of today. Besides public speaking, there might be fear of the dark or the future, a pandemic, fearing we don't get many likes on Facebook, someone from a different race or culture, or maybe we fear a particular political party or their worldview, even wars and rumors of wars. All of these can be scary, but there's one storm that runs throughout the Bible, one fear that affects every person on earth. It's the opinions of others, what people think about us. We're often fearful of this. Like Jeff Foxworthy and his famous comedy routine, "You might be a redneck if..." Let's play a different scenario. You might have the fear of man if... if you're overcommitted, for instance. You find it hard to say no, even when wisdom dictates that you should. You're either a people pleaser or driven by the pride you feel because people need you. Both of these are a sure sign of the fear of man. You might have the fear of man if you need, and then fill in the blank from your spouse. It's not hard for your spouse to quietly take the place of God in your life. When we need someone for ourselves more than we love that someone for the glory of God, we're just trying to manipulate them, and that's not love. You might have the fear of man if you fear being exposed as an imposter at work or on the team or at school. You might have the fear of man if you second-guess decisions because of what others might think. Are you afraid of making mistakes that will make you look bad in other people's eyes? You might have the fear of man if you're easily embarrassed. This can happen when we exalt the opinions of others to the point where we are ruled by them. You might have the fear of man if you need likes from social media. You might have the fear of man if you tell white lies. Lying and other forms of living in the dark are usually ways to make ourselves look better before other people. They also serve to cover our shame. You might have the fear of man if people make you feel angry, depressed, or crazy, and you just don't want to be around them. You might have the fear of man if you're obsessed with diets. Even when they're under the heading of health, aren't many diets dedicated to impressing others? A desire for the praise of men is always one of the ways that we exalt people above God. And if that's not enough, here's one more. You might have the fear of man if you're too timid to share your faith in Christ because of what others think about you. The fear of man is such a part of our human fabric that we should check for a pulse if someone denies it. How did the disciples go from being so fearful in the storm to being so bold in the book of Acts? They developed rather quickly a greater fear of God. How do you conquer your fears? The same way. Over in Exodus 20, when God appeared on Mount Sinai, the people were so terrified. Moses made this interesting statement. He said, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin." Now follow this carefully. On the one hand, they were not to fear God. On the other hand, they were to fear him as a deterrent to sin. How do you explain this apparent contradiction? One writer points out that God was, in effect, saying that the Israelites should not fear God as slaves fear their masters. Rather, they were to fear him as sons. The fear of a slave is to cower. Slaves want to run away from their master, but son fear is something different. It motivates us to seek and please the Father. It's the fear that my actions might disappoint him. It's the fear that my love of sin is greater than my love of God. That's a godly fear. The most radical treatment for the fear of man is the fear of God. You must see God as bigger than people are, bigger than any storm in your life. It can take years for this truth to work its way into your life. So why not start today? Ask God to develop in you a proper fear of him so that all your other fears vanish.